And we get to round this out today with another individual who may not need an introduction in this venue, who has done a lot of this clinical trial work over the years. Finally, we have Dr. Skip Rizzo, who is the director of medical VR at the Institute for Creative Tech and a research professor at the University of Southern California, who's going to talk to us about best practices in clinical trials.
All right. Thank you. Okay, a couple quick disclaimers. First off, this topic was a homework assignment. Brennan reached out last year and he said, I want you to do a talk on this topic. And I'm thinking, oh man, and you got to follow an expert from the FDA and an expert from NIH, plus myself and my colleague that knows a lot about this area. And I'm thinking, oh man. Second off, the first time I've done this talk, so I might be a little shaky in some parts. But anyway, let's get on with it. So the talk is clinical trials and tribulations. And there's a happy part coming up here. Come on, here we go. Best practices for designing and conducting MXR clinical trials. There's another name for this talk as well. And I actually piloted this image earlier in the week to some students at USC in a talk, and it was like just blank stares. And I realized that song came out like 40 years before they were born. Grateful Dead tune, in case some youngins here. But we know, from a logical, theoretical point of view, there's a lot of positive things to be said for why VR is great, and MR, XR, whatever. A whole list of reasons why it can advance, what we do in clinical care. And keep in mind, aviation simulation. This is, this has always been my metaphor from the very beginning. Just like an aircraft simulator can test and train piloting ability under a range of controllable conditions, we can test, train, teach, and treat human functioning similarly with VR. I've said that line a couple of times. So that's how I look at what we can do in VR. Now, the technology's caught up with the vision. Brenda's out there back in the early days, and a whole bunch of folks here, when we were using, what was it, a $22,000 headset somebody showed for Jim Blaskovich's lab. I mean, it was just crazy. And now if we can do something for $500, it's amazing. And this is also pretty cool. As well, we've got events, places that we can meet, greet, hang out. A scientific community's evolved around this. At the same time, significant research literature. Everybody steals Brennan's slide here, so I may as well join the crowd. But I mean, it's great. I mean, the work has evolved in volume for sure. And we have our journals, so we've got places to go. Of course, we always want to get in some of the journals that aren't so VR related, because we want to get our stuff out to a wider audience as well. But it's great to have a home here, especially JMXR, a new journal here, just a little plug there. I think it's going to be an important journal moving forward, along with the others here. And what we've seen, and oftentimes we look at this as a measure of the advancement in the science of the field, is the many reviews and meta-analyses. And I don't know if you're like me, but I don't have time to read all the articles that come out. I try, but I read a lot of reviews. I read a lot of meta-analyses, and a lot of times I look for the punchlines, and a lot of the times the punchlines are, efficacious for this, better than no treatment, and all these, all the things that say VR is cool, it's great, and it's clinically efficacious. And in fact, this is sort of a non sequitur, but it's kind of interesting. Is it due to the continuous development of VR hardware and software? It's essential to conduct further research, especially since no review has concluded that VR does not work. Is that a ringing endorsement? Well, I'm not going to fault any of the people that have put out these studies because it's a hell of a lot of work to do a meta-analysis and a review. A lot of thought goes into it. But we do have a little dirty secret here, and that is sometimes what goes into these reviews and meta-analysis, the quality of the evidence isn't always great. I'm just going to show a couple of examples. And this is nobody's fault. This is just a reality. And I'll get into the reality in a minute. But, you know, on the one hand, you've got a litany of problems with all the data that was put together into this. And again, no fault of the people doing the hard work here. But the punchline is data suggests VR may have a role in acutely painful procedures. I believe that. I know most of the people here, and I know patients that do it will swear by it. But we have to appeal to a higher calling, I guess. Same thing here. They went through a bunch of studies, but only 4 were fit to be included in this systematic review. But of those 4 studies, beneficial as a psychological tool for intervention in mental health. Another one here, they started right out of the gate, you know, coming right up and saying a lot of low quality evidence, you know, for a variety of reasons. I'm not going to list all the reasons here, but you can read them for yourself. But greater effect of VR compared to other treatments or no treatment. And this is for cerebral palsy, I believe, in children and young adults. So it's good work. People are doing the work, but do we have to up our game a little bit? We have one more. And these Cochrane reviews, if you haven't read any of these, I highly recommend them. They're really well done, and they use a specific set of criteria for evaluating the evidence that goes into these reviews. And it's also the same kind of evidence that you want to have in a clinical trial that you're running. But, you know, challenges here in an area that I think really does make a difference for people. You know, science is hard. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Now, to address this, you know, a number of folks in this room have put out papers that are guidelines or, you know, papers that, you know, kind of provide a little bit of direction. Because a lot of times people that are in VR, they might not be people that grew up in a, you know, a hardcore experimental background. They're artists, they're visionaries, they're computer scientists, they're entrepreneurs, and they want to do cool and good stuff, meaningful stuff. So these are intended to be guidelines to help kind of guide the field. I'm not here to say, oh no, everything we've done over the last 30 years is crap, because it's not. We've got a lot, and I go back to that first thing about since no trial has shown that VR is worse. You know, I don't know, maybe you know of a couple, but you know, I defer to my colleague from the NIH. But some of the guidelines are helpful. I love infographics, you know, and that's why I love the FDA infographics. You know, just easy peasy, get a good look, you know what you're doing, you get some guidance. That's what you need. Sometimes you're embarrassed to ask a question, you know, that, you know, you're afraid somebody's going to think you're dumb or something. These guidelines like this, not deep dive in the hardcore experimental procedures, but still very useful. The Pedro scale, I don't know if you, I just found this when I was putting this talk together, but it looks like a nice little checklist that when you're designing a study or you're evaluating or reviewing a study, here's some nice things that you want to see in a study. So I think that's kind of helpful. And of course, the grade system, I think this is probably the top of the line and the most critical and the most challenging and the most heartbreaking when you see, you know, meta-analysis come out and you start to look at how they rate the quality of the evidence. It's like, oh man, when is it going to be enough? But it's useful in guiding you, and that's science never sleeps. You know, it's a hard thing, and you got to iterate, and you got to grow and evolve, and this is how you do it. You pay attention to these things when you're thinking in advance on how you're going to design a study, what's going to be most important. And I'll go into some of my successes and failures in a minute here, because that's the tribulations part of this talk. So from all these things, and all the things I've been reading about this over the last year that I've been anguishing about doing this damn talk, you know, this is the sort of a little collection of things that I think are common and are addressable, and things that you can think about. And I'll point out a couple of these things as I review some of the work I've done. So, but I got to take a detour here, and there's another name for this talk, an old guy telling stories. I had a friend who, she promotes concerts, and she promoted a concert for Veterans Charity, and somehow she got this massive blues player, older guy, but great, and she went back, she got to hang out backstage with him, and you know, she was there. I saw her after the concert, and I go, hey, so I'm not gonna say who he was, but how was it? How was it hanging out with him? And she goes, oh man, an hour and a half, I had to listen to stories. And she goes, that's what old men do. They tell stories. And I'm thinking, oh Christ, how old am I? But so this may be an old guy telling stories now, but I promise you I'm gonna try to make them a little bit interesting, you know, as we go forward. And thank you again, ChatGPT, image generator. So, well, all right, first off, you know, one thing we gotta, well, let me ask this question. What's the answer to 99 of 100 questions? Anyone? Money, money, there we go. Yes, it's money. And this is, you know, anybody that works on soft money or has to write grants to bring in money, or, you know, pitch investors and everything, you know that money is the factor. I mean, you're gonna have all the will and inspiration and strive for meaningfulness, but if you don't have the funding to do this stuff, you're up the creek. And in this field, it's a little easier now, but you know, in this field, pretty much, if you got an idea and you wanna do it, you got two jobs. Number one, you got to raise the money to build this stuff. You got to build it, and there's a cost there. And then, not that that job is enough, but then you got to get to your next job, and that's, you got to test it. You know, you got to do the studies, and there's often not enough money to go around. And if anybody says ChatGPT doesn't hallucinate, look at where that mouse's tail is coming from. I like it though. Anyway, so we got double duty. We got two things to do. So let me tell some stories about MedVR Lab and some of the work that we've done over the years. You've probably seen parts of this slide in the past, the 4 core areas we've worked in over the years. Some of the early stuff, what it looked like, you know, PTSD exposure therapy, one of the early virtual classrooms for testing kids with attention process impairments, some very early physical therapy, game-based stuff that we did with webcams and LED markers, and our first virtual patient for clinical training in 2006. Fortunately, managed to, you know, halfway decent at writing grants and got money and was strategic and managed to grow and evolve these things, and also now work in private industry taking some of these things. That guy on the bottom right, you'll see him later, but he's a virtual patient that we tested at the VA for training motivational interviewing in clinicians, and I'll talk about that later. But anyway, so a little bit of the history, and I'm going to talk about a couple of these things. First off, I'm going to, one of the ones I'm most proud of, and mainly because I worked with great colleagues, and that was with Joanne DeFede and Barbara Rothbaum, Mike Roy, doing the largest randomized control trial. Still not that large, actually, 192 people, but the largest one in the VR clinical literature, comparing it with exposure therapy, traditional prolonged exposure. And we thought we had a little hubris. We thought we were going to beat traditional exposure, but it turned out our traditional PE group did really well. So there wasn't much of a D, but in our foresight, we predicted in advance, as everybody would know would be intuitive, that the VR group would do better when you have patients with comorbid depression. These are folks that are hard to emotionally engage in the difficult work of imaginal exposure therapy, facing their trauma. It's very hard when people have comorbid depression. And in pre-planned, that's the key thing. This wasn't a p-hacking exercise. We planned this in advance, and we got that. We also, at the start of the study, asked people if you had your choice, you're going to be randomized, what would you pick? Make a case for barriers to care, that more people would have picked VR for their treatment. And when I say we predicted advanced, as Brennan showed in one of his, you can get a publication writing up your protocol before, so you can get 2 out of it. And you write it up and you document it. It's on grants.gov, and you have an actual study in a journal. And this was the best that I've ever worked with, and not through no fault of my own, but the first 2 authors are real methodological warlords. So it had all this stuff. It was multi-site, different geographic areas. All hypotheses were limited and pre-planned and written down. Well-powered for the primary outcomes. Randomized double-blind. There was a med condition in this cognitive enhancer D-cycloserine. It's supposed to boost the effects. Blinded assessment, which was key. No assessor that did any of the 4 psych assessments across the course of treatment, or the 3 psychophys assessments across the course of treatment knew what condition the person was. So, psychophys, cortisol assessment. I mean, what's not to love? I mean, one thing, for example, we recorded every session, and we're talking about 9 sessions for each patient, probably about 1,500 hours of therapy, so that independent blinded reviewers could watch these things separate from each other and rate treatment fidelity, make sure nobody was going off the range doing that psychoanalytic stuff in therapy, that they were delivering the therapy to the protocol. So this had all the good things. Now, what's not to love? Well, the price tag. It was over $11 million over the course of 5 years. I mean, 3 sites, all the staff, all the assessors, on and on and on. So if you've got the money, you can do something like that. And the urgency of the problem with the DOD made it so we were able to be lucky enough to get this and to do this work. But most people don't have access to that. And so you end up cutting corners. Now, sometimes it's not cutting corners, it's the politics. Or, well, let me give you an example. Okay, here we go. We thought we were being smart. We would take all the content we built for treating PTSD. We're going to put ourselves out of a job on the back end treating PTSD by doing a better job building resilience scenarios, immersive narratives, pre-deployment, so people could go through an immersive narrative where they were with a squad, like being in a Band of Brothers episode, but in VR. And there were 5 to 7 minute episodes. At the end, something bad would happen that was modeled after, things, moral injury type events, or actual threat or death, death of a child, death of one of your squad members. I'll show you what that looked like.
Vehicle 3.
So,
IED, drive, man, go!
so getting hit with an IED
Vehicle 3,
on
just
open
got
road.
hit.
That's an
We're
example.
down. We're down.
And then, think of it as an emotional obstacle course. After that part happens, then out walks this guy who comes out of a building on this roadway after you get out of the vehicle.
Let's start with learning how your body reacts to stress. The caveman part of your brain, the amygdala, goes into action. Its job is to identify threats. If the crap you're in is real, the caveman starts beating his drums, sending signals throughout your body, telling it to get ready. I worked with a sergeant who stayed amped after serious encounters, sometimes for days. Not good. When you get a chance to lower your guard, you want to make sure you help your body recover from the stress response that was initiated. One way of doing this is through a simple breathing exercise. It can help calm your heart, normalize your breathing, decrease blood pressure, and help you sleep. Let's try it a couple more times. Breathe in silently through your nose, deep into your belly. Now slowly exhale from your mouth. Let me hear it.
So we spent a lot of money building this, and we put it as part of another project at Fort Benning, Squad Overmatch. We had soldiers, boots on the ground, actually try it and weigh in on it, and that's what this little thing is here, where it was viewed, user-centered feedback that was relevant, it was positive, they would use it, it would be something that would help them, they could imagine it, all these positive things. And then we also did a study where we looked at heart rate variability during some of the pivotal activities in the event and found validating psychophys data for the emotional evocativeness of the scenario. And then our champion at the DOD retired. And after all that, we, basically, we wanted to do the real kind of longitudinal randomized control trial that you would do. And all of a sudden, no more funding done. So that's shelfware now, although I think it's going to rise again. There's some interest by a military somewhere other than the United States that might want to use it. But anyway. But now, the United States, they don't even want to pay attention to Middle Eastern context. They're kind of gearing for a war in another part of the world. So this is probably not ever going to be used for us here. Anyway, another area, just a little aside, a virtual classroom, more modern version, massive amount of data, over 1,000 kids. This was with the intention of getting FDA approval for this assessment tool. Child has to put on the headset, attend to stimuli, continuous performance task on a board. Meanwhile, systematic distractions. And you could see in a couple of the metrics on the left, missed targets. The red box, the red bars are neurotypical kids. The yellow are ADHD kids. So you can see clear differences across the age span. Kids get better with age, as you would expect. I mean, really nice stair-step thing. And head movement, which is one of the added things. I mean, this is where VR shines. I mean, head tracking is essential to update the graphics and make it VR, but it's also a measurement tool, and that's really cool. Well, we applied for FDA approval, and then as we were getting to a point where we were going to have to put in our final submission, the reviewers, we got a publication out of this, but the reviewers said, well, where's the test-retest reliability? And where's the concurrent validity with other computerized tests? And it was like, well, this company had enough money just to get kids in that documented didn't have ADHD or had a definitive diagnosis, but we couldn't have them sit around for 90 minutes and test them again or have them come back a week later. And there wasn't the funding at the time to, put them through another test, a TOVA, whatever. So now we got to go back and run a sample of about 100 kids. We figure that's going to be enough and do all that. But, these are the kind of things, are you driven by a corporate interest to get something, get FDA approval because it can make your product better? But, there's these things you got to think about from, I probably should have done a better job of making a convincing case, but it still would have been very expensive. So again, money comes in. This was the bottom panels here, the motivational interview training. This was up at Puget Sound, a randomized controlled trial. Did VA training and motivational interviewing online, plus a review, VA training, and 45 minutes interacting with a virtual patient, get experiential training. And basically on that one, we found practice with a virtual patient led to superior performance as rated by interaction with a live actor patient. The interactions were recorded and blindly reviewed by motivational interviewing experts, not knowing if it was baseline, post-training, 3-month follow-up. But the interesting thing, and I'm bringing this up mainly because we oftentimes rely on self-report, and one of the self-report measures we use here was a self-efficacy scale for motivational interviewing. And basically the people in the control group, they thought they were as good based on their ratings, their self-report checklist, as opposed to the actual performance in the real world. So self-report, what else do we got a lot of times? We got to do it. But sometimes you got to, do something else. And with VR, we're always making a case you're going to have better transfer to the real world that we're trying to mimic in our training environment. Up top here, I just want to show a quick video. Another kind of a limitation related to self-report. This is a clinical interviewer virtual human. It's interviewing a person. Meanwhile, a camera and microphone and everything is tracking the user's expression, affective expression, with the idea that it updates the character's next response, but also quantifies that over time so you can tell if a person is in a state of psychological distress.
When was the last time you felt really happy?
When was the last time? I don't know. Yeah, I'm not someone who's really like, I don't have any real highs. I feel like I'm a level person. It's just happy? I guess to answer your question, probably a couple months ago.
I noticed you were hesitant on that one. Would you say you are generally a happy person?
Okay, so in this case, you're seeing the logic by picking up and detecting some of these signals, psychological signals, would change up what the next question was. If he said, oh, happy, the other day I went to a party, I met friends, then the character would say, okay, great, next question, and move on. But we also quantified all of that and then compared it to self-report data as ground truth as to the state of someone's distress, anxiety, depression, PTSD. And is that the ground truth? Or should we be doing known groups, people that actually have a lot of problems? Maybe someone admitted into a psychiatric unit for a 3-day thing and they've lost their medications and they're dysregulated, and then have them interact with this and then get on the meds, calm down, whatever. You got to have creative things. If you're going to make cases that these signals actually mean anything in clinical practice, comparing it to what somebody fills out on a self-report checklist is a step, but it's not there. I'm getting to the end. Okay, so what are the best metrics? Hold me back to, what are the best metrics now that, Brennan's doing this with his team. There's a bunch of us out here that are building virtual humans that might be on mobile apps or might be on internet apps, whatever, for mental health purposes. What are the best metrics to determine if they actually have value? Here's one we're doing for the VA, Battle Buddy.
Hello there, and welcome to Battle Buddy, where we combine conversational AI, sensing, wearables, and mobile technology to provide evidence-based wellness content, create and walk veterans in crisis through their personal suicide safety plan, and connect them to appropriate care when needed. My name is Kevin, and I'll be guiding you through our vision for suicide prevention and wellness.
So, you've got all the stuff about do they like it, giving them the ability to customize the character around a preference, all those kinds of things, how much time they spend, the activity levels monitored by an Apple Watch or Fitbit, the amount of time they spend in provocative states, psychophys, language analytics, I mean, there's a ton of things going down to self-report, and the bigger issues, which is being built for, is suicide prevention. I mean, how do you tell if it actually reduces suicide? What kind of a study do you got to do to document that? And so will it always be patients like it and they use it a lot and they seek treatment in a moment of crisis? Maybe that is your big win. I don't know, we're still building the thing, but we're constantly going, what's the level of analysis that we have to pursue in order to document that, we've got something here other than, some half-ass app on the Apple Store. Anyway, all right, getting to the end here, the road ahead. And sometimes you got to look in the rearview mirror, and these are sort of inspirational things that make me believe that VR is a solid tool for research. And these just, comments from the early days. Myron Kruger, arriving at VR, coming at a moment when computing in general is moving from automating the paradigms to the past to creating new ones for the future. This one from NSF, computer simulation is now joined theory and experimentation. It's a third path to scientific knowledge. This was from a neuro, I think it was Nature Neuroscience piece, 2002. A little ahead of its time, but I think we all agreed then, and we still agree now, that this is a powerful tool. And then this guy, recycled some thoughts he had from back in the 90s with the ultimate Skinner box, and the whole point of it being, controlled stimulus environment in which we can measure performance in, so many ways. And anyway, so, sometimes instead of thinking about we should always think about how do we do the research to validate the technology. Maybe we also got to look at how we use the technology to improve the research, because VR is the ultimate Skinner box, and we can't forget that. Even if we get depressed about, a lukewarm study here or there, these folks are trying, and they're struggling on minimal budgets, trying to get graduate students or undergrads or, it's brutal. Anyway, I'm preaching to choir here. I'm going to get off of that. And the different levels of science. Thank you, ChatGPT. And with that, this talk's freely available. It's going to be updated again because the first time I did it, and I see all the bugs and warts. But I'll do it again. But the slides are freely available. And so thank you for your time and attention.
All right, I think we can all agree it was worth hanging around to hear some stories. So thank you,
Old
Skip.
man telling stories.
We want your Dolly prompts, by the way. We're very curious.